everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Do Good to Lead Well podcast series. I'm thrilled to have you join us today. I'm really excited about this upcoming conversation. My name is Craig Dowden. I'm the host of the Do Good to Lead Well podcast. I'm an executive coach, keynote speaker, and I'm really passionate about the science and practice of positive leadership. And for those of you who have just joined today, this is your first experience of the live webinar. Welcome. This is going to be a whole lot of fun. I'm very excited to have this conversation. For those of you who are return live attendees and return listeners, welcome back. Love to have you with us. This podcast series, Do Good to Lead Well, really came at the beginning of the release of my first book, Do Good to Lead Well. And one of the things I am so privileged to experience is to have these extraordinary thought-provoking conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, TED speakers, whose work is really revolutionizing the world of work as well as in our personal lives. And so what I've done is now package this and release it as a series of podcast episodes. So I take the live webinar and now we share that with a global audience. And before we start our conversation today, just a special heartfelt expression of gratitude because of your ongoing support, your feedback, your likes, your comments, your sharing. The Do Good to Lead Well podcast is now ranked in the top 0.5% of podcasts globally in the world in any category. And that cannot happen without your ongoing support and contributions. So feel incredibly privileged. And one of the primary reasons why this podcast has had such an impact and an interest is because of the extraordinary guests that we've been able to welcome. And I'm thrilled to have a dynamic duo today, Dr. Janet Patti and Dr. Robin Stern. They are the authors of Emotional Intelligence for School Leaders. Dr. Patti is a professor emeritus at the Hunter College School of Education, where her teaching and research concentrate on educational leadership. And Dr. Robin Stern, who's a return guest to the program, is the co-founder and senior advisor to the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a licensed psychoanalyst with 30 years of experience. They are both co-creators of the Star Factor coaching model, which helps educational leaders enhance their emotional intelligence skills. So, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. We could spend almost the entire program talking about the great work that you've both done. So a very warm welcome to the Do Good to Lead Well podcast.
Thank you, Craig. It's just delightful to be back here, and congratulations on all of your work and for your ranking in world podcasts. How incredible is that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. I'm excited about being here and being able to have this chat together.
No, and this is so great. I mean, what I love is, and the book is so important, and I would also argue so timely. And for those of you who are joining live, as always, you can chime in with your questions. You have the chance to talk with two of the leading global experts. So please jump in, ask questions, dive in. It really enriches the conversation. And what I love about the book, again, it's just so applicable in every aspect of our lives. And in the opening chapter, you talk about the leader's well-being or our well-being. And so where I'd like to start the conversation is, what is the impact, the stressors that we have, that we experience, what do they have on our well-being? And then also what I think is fascinating about your work as well is the trickle-down effects. So can you talk us through that? Because I think that's so important.
Janet, do you want to start with statistics?
Sure. Well, you know, I mean, it goes without saying that well-being is something that we're all very concerned about today. And even the Surgeon General has added that it's important that we really not double down on really improving our well-being. In our field, which is the education field, it's no different. Right? We have seen principals, superintendents, everyone at a leadership level just completely burn out, and the data supports that as well. And I know that I'm speaking for leaders of all type when this happens, especially post-pandemic. So our well-being is talking about our engagement. It's talking about our relationships. It's talking about our levels of happiness and joy. And it's whether we have positive emotions or not. And when you think about that, that's pretty important. And many of us in leadership positions are not faring well.
Mm.
I'll jump in here. I'll add to that, that at a time in our world where we are more connected than ever, what Janet brought up about these Surgeon General's warning to us is that we are lonelier than ever, that 50% of the adults are reporting being lonely. And when you are not connected to other people, you miss out on a tremendous, on a key to resilience. You miss out on the opportunity to have well-being. It's so true that positive relationships are great predictors of happiness, well-being, and even health later in life, even a longer life. So having those relationships is key. And the other really important thing that we know, and you know this because you wrote a book about mastering yourself and mastering, right? That's the first step, mastering yourself. So we know that emotions matter. And emotions, I'm sorry, I hear a phone ringing in the background. I'm just going to ignore it. Tell me if it's distracting for you.
No, that's okay.
Okay, great. So emotions matter. And so when you have strong emotions, when you can recognize them and then address them, we say, if you can name it, you can tame it, then you are in control of what's going on for you in your relationships, what's going on for you in your performance every day. Since we know that emotions matter, if you're not recognizing what's going on, then you don't have the opportunity to address it. And emotions matter for our ability to focus, for our ability to make decisions. And leaders are decision makers, if nothing else, right? They're decision makers constantly, one after the other after the other. Relationships and emotions drive our relationships and our physical and mental health. And I'll stop there. Something you want to add to that, Janet?
No, I was just thinking about the work-life balance that people talk about and how hard it is to have that. And I think I know what I know is that what we hear from the folks that we work with is that no matter how hard they try, they can't do it all. It's just not possible. And on top of that, for example, principals and superintendents in their roles, there is always this administrative end that needs to be taken care of, and the real purpose for their job, which is to be there for the employees, for the teachers, for the nurses, for whomever it is that they are should be taking care of. It just doesn't happen. For example, using education again as an example, the classroom where the principal wants to be is the last place he sometimes can get to when it is the most important place that he should be.
Yeah. And we see that show up in when we do surveys and ask people, how are they feeling? People are out of balance. They're spending way too much time in unpleasant feelings of low energy and depression and sadness and loneliness, and high energy, low pleasant feelings as anger and anxiety. And it's not that we're going to be or should have the goal of being happy all the time, but we want to be there 70% of the time. We want to have our feelings to the right of our tool called the mood meter, 70% of the time, where we are feeling content, we are feeling serene, we are feeling connected, or we're feeling excited and happy.
Well, and what I love about what you're sharing, and thank you, I've already got some great comments coming in, is that, and both of you touched on the importance of positive relationships and the connection that we have with each other. And it reminds me of the wonderful work of Dr. Robert Waldringer as well, who's leading the Harvard study on happiness, and he was on the program, and he was saying the same thing, exactly where you are. And I love why I was particularly excited about our conversation today is that, as you both also pointed out, like emotional intelligence is critical in terms of building our resilience, enhancing our decision-making effectiveness, building relationships with ourselves and with other people. And I'm really excited to dig into that This is a great question. I'm glad it came up. Already have an audience question. So Bruce was wondering, sometimes I wondered if emotional intelligence skills can be learned. Like, do you just have it or not? So it sounds like this is something people can grow. Like, how open can we be to growing our emotional intelligence?
Very open is the answer. At the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, we have three core principles. The first one is that emotions matter. The second is emotions are social, and we're already talking about both. And the third is that emotional intelligence can be learned and developed at any age. The earlier you can start, then the less undoing you have to do of bad habits and restrictive ways of dealing with your emotions. And the older you are, the more opportunity you have to bring your experience to bear when you learn about emotional intelligence and you learn that emotions matter. There's no question about I wish we had Bonnie Brown with us. Bonnie Brown is a leader who we have worked with for many years, and she's a very emotionally intelligent leader. In fact, she would ask people how they felt before they even walked into her door as a superintendent. But Bonnie taught emotional intelligence to elder care facilities in Florida several years ago, and she said she had great results, meaning that people loved it.
Absolutely. And I think the chance or the opportunity that we now know about neuroplasticity, and we know that the brain can continue, the prefrontal lobes can continue to stretch themselves, and we can learn new things. And even at our ripe young age, it's really possible to do. And so that's a big aha in terms of answering Bruce's question, because we can. And yes, there are strategies, just as Robin was referring to, that we use to be able to help that to happen.
Well, and I really appreciate and in both of your answers, and again, getting so many positive comments here, and I'm already queued up with another question. So this is great. That's why, as I was saying, I was looking forward to this, is I love how you frame it where some people say, we'll rely on the expression of you can't teach an old dog new tricks kind of thing. And I love how you're both reframing that and saying, actually, this is not a limitation. This is an enhancement whereby our lived experience can inform how we show up and how we build those skills. So I've got another question from Sarah, who's wondering, are there certain emotional intelligence skills that are easier to learn than others?
That is a great question.
It is.
Say it depends. Thank you, Sarah, for that question, but it depends. We all already have an emotional intelligence profile. So if we think about the skills of emotional intelligence as recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating, we can all do that. Otherwise, we probably would be home in bed all the time, not really engaging in the world. But some of us come more easily to those skills. Some of it is hardwired, and some of it is learned. We learn it in relationships, as a matter of fact. We learn it by people modeling emotions for us. We learn it by people answering our questions about emotions and either showing curiosity or being judgmental, pushing us to shut down our emotions. And we learn it by whether or not emotions even have a seat at the table in your conversations. So if people are talking about emotions, you may learn more quickly as a young child and as a grown-up with influences from the world at those dinner tables, how to recognize emotions in yourself and others. If people are talking about emotions, Janet and I met each other talking about emotions in our families, I don't know, 25 years ago, right? Over a glass of wine, I don't mind sharing. And we spent a lot of time unpacking the understanding or our understanding of how we came to certain emotions that we were having as young girls and as women. And then labeling emotions, well, that's pretty easy to do. You can just increase your vocabulary, one emotion at a time every week. Do it. We have an app for that. You can look it up. And I think the harder skills for all of us are expressing and regulating, which is how emotional intelligence shows up in the world. Internal skillfulness, recognizing, understanding, labeling, is something others don't see, but how you express and regulate, that's how people see you. And for leaders, a stressed out leader means a stressed out school.
Right.
A busy leader in a meeting means a stressed out meeting.
Mm,
Absolutely. And then I would just add to that, that foundational to all of this work is really how self-aware we become, how
mm,
self-aware we are, and that, recognizing and identifying and understanding all of that is adding to as we stretch with those, as we work with those skills that you talked about, Robin. And I would say that the more self-aware we can become, again, and there are techniques that we are using today. We are all aware of mindfulness and other things of that sort. We'll talk about, I'm sure, as we go further. But that self-awareness is key, because if someone's not aware of what's happening for them, of what they feel, then how are they going to regulate? How are they going to be able to be there for someone if they need to be, and so on?
mm. Well, and again, I love this because of the curiosity, like how important it is to be innately curious in terms of our own building our own emotional intelligence, and again, applying that. I love that insight in terms of, okay, how do we show up? I'm smiling, Janet, because I didn't know. Did you read the next question? Because
Oh, did
because
I?
Allison, no, because and I know you can't. So it's funny because Allison was wondering what, if any, link is there between mindfulness and emotional intelligence? That's why I was smiling as you were giving that answer. So perhaps you can delve into
Janet,
that, Janet.
jump in and I'll add.
I've been just, there's a big connection, as we know. Mindfulness has certainly become a technique, a strategy, a way of life for people today for no uncertain reason. It's because it helps to actually retrain the brain. It helps us to slow down, watch our breath, listen to our breath, and to center ourselves to become more self-aware. And so mindfulness, is a very critical aspect. We're learning a lot about it in education. In fact, it's an interesting point is the chancellor of New York City schools announced not too long ago that he would like to see mindfulness in every classroom. And we thought, oh my goodness, that is so fantastic. I wish I had it when I was a young child. So yes, mindfulness is a critical part of the development that we are using.
In specific, and I'll just add this to what you said. Thank you, and thank you for that question. We have a tool that we use to prolong the space and time between when we are triggered and when we respond, and we call that the meta moment. And we talk about calling to mind our best self during that time. But even before you can call to mind your best self, you've got to take a pause. And in that mindful moment, find that you want to find that you want other people to see. And then from that vantage point, you can choose an action. So many of us are just on automatic, and the pressure that we live every day to go from one thing to the next, to the Zoom screen, to the in-person meeting, to the paper in front of you, to your family, it's just overwhelming. And so we don't have enough of that pause. And no, just act. I mean, and more, there's more to say about that, but take it away. Go ahead, Craig.
No, I was going to say, and what I love about what both of you are sharing, again, it's kind of slowing that down a little bit. And sometimes people think, well, there has to be this massive investment like of time when you're saying how quick life progresses in our personal and professional lives. And then it's like just slowing down. It can take a moment. I love how each of you are talking about like taking that moment and then also imagining like your best self or how you choose to show up in these situations. It's so powerful for the people around us and also so empowering for us, which is why I love the work that both of you are doing. And I'm thrilled that the book is out, because it really gives us those skills. And I've got another one. This is just so funny. There's just questions continue to come in. So Trevor was wondering, like, I kind of struggle with mindfulness. I find it difficult. Are there any tips or tricks that you can help me open my mind more to this practice?
So I would say to Trevor, thank you. I'm wondering whether the trouble you're having with mindfulness is that Is the word mindfulness? It doesn't seem like something you ought to be doing, or is it in the practice itself? Um, Many years ago, Janet and I both taught in the Summer Principals Academy in New York City, training aspiring urban leaders. And one of the things that the feedback we got early on in putting the Principals Academy together was that we had to be very careful of the way we labeled things because people might think it was religious, right? And so we began to think about those mindful moments and meditations that we taught, and we did teach many different kinds of meditation and mindfulness activities. We called them self-awareness training, right? And so if you think about training your attention or training, helping you with focus or training your self-awareness, maybe it has a different ring for you. And then the other thing is, I know when I first began to do mindfulness or mindfulness activities, I could not, I couldn't do the mantra. It just didn't work for me. I couldn't, I had trouble with clearing my mind. I guess if I had stayed with that and persisted and practiced, it would have been fine. But instead, I tried a meditation, a mindfulness activity that was about noticing. And I believe that Dan Goleman taught it. I don't remember what webinar it was, or maybe they didn't even have webinars then, but it was a noticing of what was happening. So as you were breathing in and out, and let's say you your foot was itchy, you would say sensation, and then you'd come back to your breath. And then maybe you had a thought, oh, I'm meeting Janet for lunch today. And you would say thought, and then you'd come back to your breath. And I found that to be very helpful and very usable, very user-friendly. And the other thing, the other meditation, mindfulness that I do is Sharon Salzberg's metta meditation, which is about loving kindness.
Mm.
And we can always get behind sending compassion to ourselves and compassion to other people. And you can read about that online. You can read about that in Sharon Salzberg's book, Loving Kindness. So I would recommend something that works for you. Thich Nhat Hanh has a very simple in-out, deep, slow kind of mindfulness moment. And Janet, what can you
No, I think you just gave a wonderful series of ways in which Trevor and others can really work with it. I think the breathing takes time to get used to following that breath and letting that breath direct us. And I love the little techniques, the small things. I was just reading one not too long ago from another Yolanda, I think her first name was, she had created this little thing called RAIN. And I thought, what is that? And it actually says, first thing you want to do is recognize, right, what's going on for you. The second thing you want to do is just allow things to be the way they are. Don't try to change anything. Don't try to do anything. As you're doing that, then go into the I, which is to investigate what's happening for you in that moment. And then in the last part, which is practice, you just non-identification. So at the N word is, I'm not going to identify with anything particularly. I'm not going to identify with I can't do it or I can. So you're just letting yourself be. And she said, when you're upset, that's a really good one to use. So I love that. I'm going to try it out. It's new for me.
I love it too. Thank you for that and for stepping us through it like that, Janet. It was beautiful, really.
I'm glad. You certainly gave a lot on this, and I think I'm glad the question was asked.
No, and thank you both. And so Trevor right away said thank you. That really has helped shift my perspective on this, and I'm excited to try out the different things you've shared and the RAIN technique. And I'm thrilled that it was asked as well, because I do feel like sometimes that is a bit of a barrier, right? Because even if we know a practice or we sense a practice can be quite beneficial, there can be barriers that we put up in our way that can prevent exploration. And one of the things I love, and again, this is why I just feel so fortunate to have these conversations, and again, that common thread, the I in RAIN is investigate, curiosity. It's just such a really powerful skill in life and in leadership. I just think it's so important. We've got another question. They just keep coming in, which is great. So Charlie was wondering, when it comes to navigating conflict, are there certain emotionally intelligent approaches to navigating conflict more effectively? The assumption is yes, would love to hear your expert opinion.
Well, I'll let Janet, the expert, talk about conflict.
Yeah, I've been working on it my whole life. So the first thing I want to say, though, is for leaders in particular, conflict for all of us, it's inevitable. But for leaders in particular, it's a major social, relationship-oriented skill that we need to have. And most people are afraid of it in some way or another. I would say that people will tend to avoid or be aggressive. It tends to, the approach of conflict is the problem. It's not the conflict, because what we know is conflict is a natural, normal way of life. It's how we address it. And the more we learn how to use strategies to deal with it, the less frightening it becomes, the more able we are to confront conflict and shift the way we deal with it. You know, we learn ways of how to deal with conflict when we're very young. We watch the adults in our lives, the people who parented us, the school teachers, the counselors, the folks at church, wherever it is that we might be, there's conflict. And from that, we form our own style of leadership, of conflict leadership. And so imagine coming into a job as a leader and you can't handle conflict. Yeah, it's something that I always say when I was teaching my students at the university. I would say, if you can't handle conflict, if you can't look into yourself in the mirror and know that you need to do some work on how you handle conflict, then don't go ahead trying to be a leader, because it's not going to happen for you.
Robin, anything to add?
I did have something that I wanted to add about boundaries. That one of the things that I like about conflict is, and I do say I like it, is that it helps you establish boundaries. Sometimes you don't know where you start and stop until your boundaries are violated. And so it's a really good opportunity, without boundaries being violated, just to know where they are. Wait a minute, I didn't like that, or wait, you did that thing and it doesn't work for me. And maybe it worked for the other person, and maybe you're going to fight about it, but it allows you to come in contact with your own values and your own boundaries. And I think also the way that self-awareness plays into and supports conflict resolution is remarkably important, and mindfulness as well, right? And if you can take those mindful moments, for example, before you go into a conversation that you know is going to be conflict ridden, if you can take a mindful moment, if you can be aware of where you are, even in the middle of that conflict, you're way ahead of the game, because then you get to choose the language you use. Then you are in control of what's coming out of your mouth, rather than your emotions being in control of you. So conflict resolution is emotional intelligence in action when done well.
Yes, absolutely. And wouldn't you call that at Yale in the program, you call it a proactive meta moment, what you were just describing? It's kind of planning.
Meta moment is, I have my hand on the doorknob and I'm thinking, okay, so I've been away for 3 days, and much as I love my husband, maybe the kitchen is a bit of a mess because he had peanut butter on the rye bread that he loves to have, and he left the peanut butter knife on the counter, even though he knows I hate the peanut butter knife on the counter. So knowing that, I'm going to take a deep breath and remember how much I love him, and remember that he was alone all weekend. I'm going to lead with compassion.
Well, I love that, and I'll raise my hand. I love peanut butter on rye bread too. So I have to put that out there just as and I just so many great comments here. Someone just wrote, my favorite, this is a master class in conflict. Thank you. So many great insights. Another comment saying, which I also agree, Janet, love how it's not conflict that's the problem, it's the approach that we take to it. And I think that's so powerful, because again, growing up, as you've both talked about before, the lessons you learn, what you think about a particular, what that means, what that represents, I love that focus on strategies, and it sparked a bunch of follow-up questions, by the way. And then also, and Robin, your point about boundaries as well, like it gives us a chance to explore what our boundaries are. I think that's so powerful. Sorry, was one of you going to say?
I was stepping on your words and I apologize, but I wanted to say that in one of the workshops Janet and I did years ago on conflict resolution, we asked people before the workshop started just to free write the top 10 words that came to their mind when they heard the word conflict and when they heard conflict resolution. And I invite everyone who's listening to do that, because as Janet said, it's your approach. If you go in scared, maybe you could reframe that now, having listened to our conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, and I love and this is a beautiful extension. And again, comments, thank you for the tips, thank you for the exercises. It also brings me back to a point that you made earlier about the power of labels, because if we're labeling conflict with negative associations, conflict could be an opportunity. Where we have differences of opinion on something. Now we may be able to co-create something that's even more awesome and brings us closer together, as opposed to creating distance. I love this exercise. I've got a follow-up question, which I'm not surprised about. David was asking, really appreciate the observation about boundaries. So how can I learn to set reasonable boundaries? Like, I struggle with understanding what's reasonable. I'd love to hear each of your thoughts on this.
That is such a great question. Reasonable to who? David, who has to decide whether they're reasonable? Because in any conflict, if you asked each person what was reasonable, they probably would have a different answer.
Mm.
So I think when people are exploring with each other where your boundaries are, or and they're pushing on another's boundary, let me think about how best to say this. There's learning going on in the moment. You know, learning going on in the moment. You're approaching someone and you are watching their facial expressions and you are seeing their body language, and you know maybe that you push too far, and even maybe just to go back to the word reasonable, maybe you think you're being reasonable, but if that being reasonable isn't working in the moment, it doesn't matter what's reasonable. It ultimately matters how you feel first. And so I would try to get underneath that. And you can't have a conversation when things are so heated. And if you're looking to find out who's reasonable and who's not, I wish my husband were here to hear this conversation. Maybe asking a tough question in the wrong order, though. An important question, but maybe it's in the wrong order.
Janet, anything to add?
You know, I just keep thinking about and boundaries are so important. And so I'm processing myself. And I think one thing for me is the non-negotiables. That, you know, if you really spend some time with yourself, and you have a tendency to talk with yourself, you know, our self-talk, we do talk to ourselves all the time, and you listen to that, and you allow yourself to feel and get under, as Robin is saying, then I think you'll come to the non-negotiables. And those non-negotiables are boundaries. You have to put little fences around them, or big ones.
I agree, and it reminds me of my work in gaslighting, because at some point in those interactions, you're thinking to yourself, I hope, or I certainly recommend that people be thinking to themselves, is this going to work for me?
Right.
Is this going to be good enough?
Yeah.
And maybe that's what we mean by reasonable. Is it reasonable for me? Can I live with this? Maybe I didn't like it to begin with, but is it going to work? And sometimes the answer to that is yes, and sometimes the answer is no.
Absolutely. And it's about loving yourself, right? I love myself enough to put up a boundary here where I know I could get hurt if I don't.
No, and again, lots of fantastic comments coming through. Thank you, thank you. Just loving the practical insights on this and valuable takeaways. So lots of people are chiming in. We've got a question back to, which is interesting. So Tina was saying, really appreciated the observations around conflict and around some of people avoid it. So I have someone in my life that avoids conflict or difficult conversations. Any strategies to make that a more inviting or easier conversation?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is in any relationship, now this is kind of along the lines of boundaries, but it's a little different. We need to develop norms of being, how we're going to live together. And and when we can do that, then we can start talking about things a little bit more. I mean, the first place he needs to be able to be willing to talk about it. So that's I think where I would start is by creating that safe space so that both parties know, and somebody who's avoiding is not going to turn around immediately and say, yeah, well, you're right, and blah 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 blah. No, somebody who's avoiding may have pain around something.
Mm.
Somebody who's avoiding may have had rough circumstances before, and it could be that it's just as simple as it's hard for them, they're embarrassed. It just depends. So you need to kind of find out and to dig into a little bit of what's going on for the other person. Avoiding can be changed, but
Mm.
only if the person recognizes that that avoiding is making them lose out in some way. And that's where I would go.
I definitely agree with that, having difficult conversations is an opportunity to get closer to people. It's an
Yeah,
opportunity
yes.
to know better.
As hard as they are, absolutely, Robin.
But people feel immediately better when they avoid it, right? If they're scared of it. So it's kind of a reinforcing cycle. Well, I feel better, so maybe I don't have to deal with it. But one thing that I would think about doing in addition to what you said, Janet, is to have a conversation about having these conversations. Like,
Right.
we're going to have some difficult conversations as time goes on, or I've been thinking about a few things I want to bring up and I think it's going to be difficult. And then norms, so here's what I'm going to need to feel safe. I'm going to need for you to say that you're not going to yell at me. What do you need for me to feel safe?
Nice.
Or we're not going to bring in my kids or my brother or all the relatives. What do you need to feel safe? And I think being an emotion scientist, as we would say, being curious, really being a good listener, having empathy for the person as you're listening, letting them know you understand what they're saying, even if you may disagree, can you understand?
Mm.
You may see it differently. And not starting out as wanting to be the fixer or the knower. Well, I know this, or why I did this, and that's the wrong way to approach it, or here's what you should do. Sometimes you just really need to listen. Sometimes in listening that's the basis for repair.
Mm-hmm.
From there.
No, I love that, and I think it's such an important point that both of you are raising. And I also appreciate kind of that emotional scientist. I had a conversation the other day around emotions or data points, and so and they're there to be interpreted, and they give you insight into your inner world. And so I absolutely love that, and also that conversation around, because I think it's fascinating for me that in our personal relationships, our professional relationships, how often do we sit down with the other person and say, hey, so how are we going to navigate these conversations together? And I love what both of you are sharing around that. It reminds me of some work that I do in my professional world, where team charters, like building out expectations of this is how we're going to treat each other. Like Robin, you just shared, like, well, I'm not going to yell, and then someone else, well, what do you need? And it's so interesting how as human beings, despite the complexity of communication, we kind of just roll over this initial framework of how we're going to relate to one another. I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I want to just add, you just brought something to mind for me, so thank you. That difficult conversations have such a bad reputation, And they're like the reputation of conflict. When actually if you can reframe just in your own mind, this is a conversation with somebody who I love. This is a conversation with my friend. I mean, there have been times where Janet and I have said, I have to give you an iMessage today. I didn't like it when. And we trust each other enough. We've known each other enough. We know what our triggers are. And I trust always that if I say something that offends Janet, she will tell me. And that's a big deal too. Going into those difficult conversations, do you trust
Yes.
the other person to be able to come to you with their feelings if you step on their toes? And if you don't trust, can you ask that question? Can you say, listen, I want to have this conversation, but I'm going to want you to tell me how it lands on you, because I may intend it one way, it may land on you in a different way. So please, can we have that agreement?
I love that, Robin. That just, I wanted a thought triggered that I'd like to share, and that is going back to leadership. If that trust is not built in the organization, then how are you going to be able to help people grow? It's just the number one. I just want to take it a little bit more globally, in that so many leaders lack that piece. They try to move people and they wonder why those people aren't going to move. Well, what would you move if you don't trust somebody? It just doesn't make sense. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing it back to leadership. Absolutely. There's nowhere to go in developing people if you can't trust. If you're a leader that doesn't act in a trustworthy way, if you're a leader who doesn't share your own vulnerabilities.
And that's really important, because then there's no consistency, there's no confidence in you. So that we could talk about this till the sun comes up another day. Right?
Well, and each of you have had an ability to kind of predict what the next question is, because Kim was saying, I'm an executive and I love how you're focusing on self-awareness. How can I ensure that I'm self-aware? What are some steps I can take?
Well, the first thing I want to say is most of us aren't. We
Right.
think we are, absolutely. We think we are, but it's really hard to truly know yourself. I mean, I think I'm very self-aware, and like somebody else might tell me, yeah, well, you never noticed what you did the other day, and blah 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 blah. So that's the first thing. That said, we can improve our self-awareness, right? And we can do things like journal writing and mindfulness and therapy and coaching and all of those activities that we take into our yoga, and that allow us to spend time with our inner selves.
I echo everything you say. Ditto, ditto, ditto. And also, I would suggest using a tool where, like, for example, the How We Feel app, where you check in with your emotions and you begin to build the skill of not only saying, okay, right now I am feeling kind of down, but I don't really know why. And then you ask yourself, importantly, well, who was I just talking to? What did I just do? What have I just been thinking about? So you begin to check to make the connection between understanding your emotion and something that just happened to you. Emotions, yes, they come unbidden, but they are responses to something that's happening inside of you or outside of you. So you have an emotion and it comes from somewhere, and then you can label it when you build your vocabulary, which also an app can help you do. And then when you begin to make the link between understanding and labeling, you're also beginning to be more nuanced and granular with understanding your feelings and expressing them. If I say to Janet, I'm upset, she knows I have big feelings, but it's not that helpful. If I say to her, Janet, I'm really disappointed. That's information. That's the data you were talking about, Craig. That's the data.
No, I love that. And I've got another question. This is great. As I had a list of questions, and this is fantastic. I was expecting the, audience engagement to be very high. So Chad said, I routinely ask my team for feedback, and I often will get, it's fine, it's good, it's so I feel like I've kind of hit a wall. Any tips around how I can deepen that conversation, because I'm genuinely interested?
So yes, if I could start this one, again, Chad, I'm assuming you're the leader and you're talking about your followers, so to speak. Well, the first thing is, would you go and tell the leader something to their face and risk that would be safe for you? I mean, that's the first question I would ask. Is that it's very hard to give senior folks feedback unless they ask for it. So you're going to get those kinds of responses if they're just off the cuff. But if you really want to, we use assessments. I mean, it is really very helpful to use. We use a number of assessments that help us get in there, and there's more of a safety in using something that I can say something that I know I'm asked to say something that my words are going to be heard and they're not going to be seen as an attack. So that's the first piece that I would share. Robin, do you have anything you want to add?
I agree with that, because people, when they're asked to give leaders feedback, are afraid of retaliation, or they're going to give feedback, the leader's not going to like it, the leader may be unaware of the fact that the next day he's yelling at you because of the feedback you gave that day. But I do think there are ways to get feedback, as Janet's saying, through the assessments we use, but also for designing short assessments to get at the information you want to know. So for example, to be thinking about with your team, your leadership team, or your coach, or people you trust at your level, questions like, do you feel comfortable expressing your opinions here? Do you feel that the things you ask for are supported? Do you feel that leadership, if you're the only one in leadership, then it's on you every time the person answers. So that might be more difficult. But if you do have leadership, more than one person in the distributed leadership, asking questions about that try to get at the impact of your behavior and how people see you as a leader. We've done studies that reveal that when people feel they're working for emotionally intelligent leaders based on what they see of their behavior, then they feel safer, they feel more able to voice conflict, they feel more able to speak up, and so on, and be creative. So if you are looking to get at that information, there's a way to ask it that is not basically an evaluation of the person, but rather some feedback, genuine feedback about the way they're coming across to you. What do you think about that, Janet?
I like that a lot, and I think that it gives the nuances a little bit, the way you were explaining it, how to move with it, and how you can. And I think that, and you making me think also that small exercises in your meeting, you may want to start to create a vulnerability, a safety by doing small things like before we begin today's meeting, we're going to share of delicious food that I ate in the last month and that I just had never had before. You come up with, and you just start with a very kind of non-consequential thing, and then work yourself closer and closer to feelings. And the more you can get there, you're starting to build that safety, and then maybe, just maybe, you'll have your folks be willing to take a little bit of risk to answer a question that you ask. That's not too difficult to answer.
No, that's awesome. And again, lots of great comments talking about how valuable this is. Love the questions, love the practices. Thank you. Very, very helpful. Got another question from Linda, who is a fairly senior executive in a large organization and has had the experience of people on their team that are lower in self-awareness and people up the chain lower in self-awareness. Love how we're talking about self-awareness. Any tips around how do you communicate more effectively with low self-aware individuals?
So first you take a big deep breath.
No,
get your rosary beads or whatever it is that you use. We've seen this. We've coached people that are in this place, and it's like it's just slow moving. Again, you're taking small steps at a time because you can't force somebody to become self-aware. That's just not going to happen. At the same time, you're pulling your hair out because he or she just doesn't get it. And so it's like we do like in teaching. You have a brand new teacher, you have to guide them more. You have to give them the steps that they need to do to teach that lesson. You need to be more present and around them and spoon feed in certain ways. Whereas if you're really experienced, you're lucky if I come by and see you once in a month. And most people who are experienced get annoyed because nobody cares to look at them. And they want attention too. But self-aware people who are not self-aware, it's you've got to build that. Try to build ways in which, again, you can get him or her to look at themselves in a way where they probably don't. Ask questions, open-ended questions. Use a lot of them that force the reflection in the person. Robin?
Well, I would probably start with a movie night, and something like, okay, it's an offsite and we are, or a Thursday night, we're all working late and we're going to watch X movie, and we're going to stop action, and we're going to talk about what that person, could that person have used some self-awareness? What could they have seen? What would have happened had they had a different kind of moment in there rather than just barreling ahead? What do you think they're feeling? Let's hear what they were feeling, things like that. I think we used to teach with movies all the time, and we've kind of fallen away from that because we are on Zoom so much, and we don't, rather than just standing up and then having the movie screen. I just think that movies, and in particular, getting it off center. So you're not starting out with, well, what are you feeling? And let me be curious about that. But then you end up in those dyads, perhaps in the audience, where you turn to the person next to you and ask those questions that would uncover some motivation. And I would focus less initially on feelings and more about behavior.
Mm.
And I frame it also like, what do you think they thought when they heard that?
Mm.
You be aware of perhaps what you were thinking when you said that. You know, so maybe a little bit backwards. I'd play around with it. We're happy to if you write to us. We'll tell you what to do.
Well, and this is great. And again, and I've got a few comments, and oh, this is awesome. Now I have permission for movie night. So really excited to get this organized. I can't believe how fast the time has flown. We're less than 10 minutes left. I do have another terrific question from Aaron, who said, really appreciated the commentary at the beginning about the linkage between emotional intelligence and personal resiliency. What is each of your experiences in terms of, can emotional intelligence in a leader impact their team more broadly?
Janet?
Big time. I love team development work and working with teams. It could be a lot of fun and it could be hard. And I think that the more, well, not I think, I know that the more emotionally intelligent team members are, the more smoothly you can get through the change process that the team wants to go through or needs to go through. It requires, again, setting those norms. It's big in teamwork. So that if you have a team that uses emotional intelligence and uses the strategies we've been talking about here today, then again, you're not going to have as many blocks as you may get if you do not. So that would be my first thing, my answer to your question, which is yes, emotional intelligence is a critical factor for teamwork, for team development.
I was thinking more specifically about some of our school leaders, and I'm sure many business leaders as well, through the pandemic. How their own skillfulness helped people to move through not only the change process when they were moving from instruction in front of the room to instruction online and maybe in front of the room in the second phase, and how what they did to create resilience for themselves or to enhance their own resilience, but also to keep that flexibility mindset, which is key for resilience, and also to keep those social relationships really continuing to feed the good stuff to each other during those times. And I mean, Principal Dawn, Principal Brooke, I mean, so many people, Fran, Kevin, I mean, there were just so many people, everyone we wrote about really has modeled emotional intelligence, and many talk deeply about what it took for them to, based on their self-awareness and their own skillfulness, to rise to the occasion, to lead their teams and to shepherd everyone moving through the process of uncertainty and unpredictability through the last few years.
What I was thinking also about some of the work that we learned from Goleman and his motivation, is talking about motivation as a critical piece of EI, talking about empathy, right, as a critical piece of EI. So aside from the other things we've spoken about, and that empathy is so big, it's so huge, and so important for teams as well. I worked with teams who honestly didn't have empathy for one another, and that's tough. So you really want to build that, and that empathy will build resilience for the team, the whole, because if individuals have it and they bring it together into the group identity, then you've got a real shot at moving your team forward.
What a beautiful note to end on, empathy.
Absolutely. Well, and it's interesting, and I'm going to share this because it just came in. Claire said, I'm loving this conversation today so much. And I had a high empathy, high EQ leader, and the impact that had on me and the rest of the team during the pandemic was extraordinary. I felt heard, I felt connected, despite wherever we were. So, and thank you both for sharing your insights. So I just thank you, Claire. It's an awesome personal story and exactly supports the fantastic work that both of you are doing. And we are, I'm just looking at the time going, how is it possibly an hour? And it is, which is great. And I know your time is incredibly in demand. So thank you. Any final words? I'd love to hear from each of you in terms of anything either that we didn't cover today that you'd love to leave people with, or a point that we discussed that you'd like to emphasize. So yeah, I would love to hear any final words from each of you. Maybe Janet, I'll start with you.
I mean, I think one thing that Robin and I think a lot about is really the big picture of where we are in our humanity. And we're just not really not nice to one another. We don't play well in the sandbox, and it's getting worse in many ways. So these skills that we're talking about, we're hoping they're going to shift that, and they're going to turn that back into kindness and compassion and concern for one another. So.
Yeah, and I would just echo that, and I would say that that not only is this the hope for humanity, but I think about my children who are in their 30s, and Janet's daughter who is entering, like, almost entering adulthood at 18, right? And what is their future? You know, and worrying about their future, and hoping that this work gets taken up in a way where, as they enter and continue on in adulthood, they're living in a world where people care about their emotions, where they become leaders who care about other people's emotions and demonstrate that every day, and give people the permission to feel, and give people the skillful, the skills that they need to negotiate their lives with well-being.
So.
Well, and thank you both. This has just been an awesome conversation. It's been an inspiring conversation. I got so many comments, like awesome, so inspiring, so helpful. And I appreciate above and beyond the timeliness of the book, and I'd encourage everybody to check it out, because as you can see, just through our conversation today, just jam-packed with tangible insights, as opposed, like a lot of times we can talk about ideas, concepts, labels, and then it's okay, how do we translate? And as you can see here, both Janet and Robin are extraordinary global experts and have dedicated their careers, their lives to teaching us how to build these vital skills in our personal and professional lives. And that's what I love. I just want to applaud, and it's just such a joy to have this conversation with you. I've been energized throughout the impact that you've had on the audience, the live audience today, and I know the listeners are going to feel that energy as well. And just really appreciate the genuine passion that you have in terms of the importance of these skills and for us to apply them. So thank you so much to everybody for tuning in. Your questions were amazing today. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Robin, for taking time out of your incredibly hectic schedules to be here. And until next time on the Do Good to Lead Well webinar and podcast series, Craig Dowden, thanks so much for joining us today. Take care, everyone.